The second theme that Jesus echoes in the words that he speaks over the chalice at the Last Supper is the theme of the covenant. When God, you remember in the Old Testament, the book of Exodus, when God enters into the covenant at Sinai with Israel, how does he do it? Through blood. You know, they sacrifice the animals, and then the blood is sprinkled on the altar and then sprinkled on the people. The blood then symbolized the joining of God's people and himself together as one. When Jesus says, therefore, this is the blood of the covenant, he sees his death as a fulfillment of that, as joining us to the Father. This is my blood of the covenant, which shall be shed on behalf of many for forgiveness of sins. So first theme, he identifies himself as the suffering servant. The second theme he brings in is that it is the covenant of Israel finding fulfillment. The third theme comes from Jeremiah. At the time of the Babylonian exile, God's people saw their suffering as a result of their disobedience to the covenant given at Sinai. They were being punished, they were in exile, because they had rebelled. The prophet Jeremiah offers them hope. And how does he do it? He says, you broke the old covenant, there is going to be a new covenant. And what's going to be the difference? The new covenant will now not be written on stone, but it will be written in your heart. And where there was disobedience, you will now have the covenant written within your heart that will bring forth a new obedience. Thus, at the Last Supper, when Jesus says over the wine, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out, he's telling us that he is ushering in this new covenant prophesied by Jeremiah. Are those three themes clear? Right? Suffering servant, the covenant of old, and now the new covenant. We're now in a better position, I think, to kind of pull this stuff together and see what Jesus is saying at the Last Supper. When the covenant was formed, let me just step back a minute from what I'm going to say. When the covenant was formed, who was that formed for in the Old Testament? For God's people, right? Was it a covenant like the one with Adam for the world? No, for Israel. Keep that in the back of your mind. Okay? At the Last Supper, Jesus, the suffering servant, is instituting the Eucharist for the church. That's key to understand, for the church. This great sacrament is the new covenant in which those who accept Jesus, who believe in him, now take part. He speaks of the many at the Last Supper and not the all, because he is speaking realistically about the many who enter the church and not the all who entered the church. Luke clearly understands this, for he is the one that has Jesus say that this is my blood poured out for you. For you. That is for the disciples present at the Last Supper, and for the disciples, all of us, now present at the celebration of the Eucharist. And new translation, by returning to a more accurate rendering of Jesus' words, and no longer saying for all but for many, we are actually returning to the constant way the church over the centuries has said these words over the chalice. This is a little interesting fact. Except for the present Missal that's been in effect since what, the 70s? All right? Except for that, the canon of the Latin Rite and all the anaphoras of the various Oriental rites, whether it be in Greek, Syriac, Armenian, all the Slavic languages, have always used the equivalent in their language of for the many and never for the all. And so now going back for the many, we're much more in line with the universal tradition of the church from which we had departed by not simply translating, but interpreting the words, in a sense, out of their context. With the new Missal, we are returning back to the Last Supper And these words, if we meditate on them, help us recapture the inner dynamism of Jesus' own words. In giving the Eucharist, Jesus is identifying himself as the suffering servant, and he is calling us as individuals to the obedience of faith that joins us to the new covenant. Therefore, the expression for the many reminds us of the personal choice that we must make to be one with Jesus, to be truly one with his church each time we celebrate the Eucharist.